Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what's going on inside your brain when you try to pick up Spanish or Mandarin or French? Well, it turns out the science of how we acquire a new language is completely counterintuitive. Welcome back to another episode of The Explainer, where today we're diving straight into the fascinating cognitive gears of language learning to answer this exact question. We're going to unpack the actual science behind second language acquisition and find out what really works. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at the language learning puzzle, the power of comprehensible input, interaction and negotiating meaning, types of corrective feedback, and finally, future trends and tech. All right, let's jump right into part one, the language learning puzzle. Decades ago, under the old behaviorist theory, learning a language was basically viewed as just habit formation. It relied heavily on mechanical repetition, just drilling flashcards until you finally got it right. But then, a researcher named Stephen Krashen introduced a massive breakthrough. He called it the acquisition learning distinction. He basically argued that true language mastery isn't about conscious rule learning at all. Instead, it's a completely subconscious process, a lot like how infants naturally pick up their mother tongue. Which brings us to part two, the power of comprehensible input. So the absolutely crucial point here is Krashen's concept of I+1. Think of I as your current level of language competence. The +1 represents language that's just slightly beyond that current level. It acts kind of like a ladder where the next rung is just slightly out of your current reach. It forces you to acquire meaning subconsciously by inferring things from context, rather than just having them explicitly translated for you. And this brilliantly illustrates how teachers actually provide that I+1 input. They make the language accessible using contextual clues, your prior knowledge, visual aids, and everyday physical objects, which they often call realia. Now notice what's entirely missing here: explicit grammar instruction. The theory argues that if the input is engaging and delivered at that perfect +1 level, your subconscious mind is going to naturally build the grammar structures all on its own. Now, Krashen's theory is incredibly powerful, and it completely revolutionized language classrooms. But it kind of leaves us wondering, is merely listening to comprehensible input really enough to achieve full fluency? Like, if you just sit there and watch thousands of hours of foreign television, will you magically become fluent? Let's find out. Let's move on to part three, interaction and negotiating meaning. So, an American psycholinguist named Michael Long recognized that we actually need a lot more than just input. We need active engagement. His interaction hypothesis claims that the messy, real-time conversations we participate in and all those awkward adjustments we make during them are the true engines of language acquisition. Think of this like a mini narrative of everyday learning. It's called the negotiation of meaning. Let's say speaker A uses a word like welfare. Step 2, a communication breakdown happens, because speaker B has absolutely no idea what that means. Step 3, speaker B asks for clarification. Wait, what do you mean by welfare? Finally, speaker A repairs the sentence, explaining it with simpler words. That active and yes, sometimes frustrating struggle to reach mutual understanding, that is exactly where your brain permanently wires the new language. Researchers call these little moments language-related episodes, or LREs. And it proves that elaborate engagement beats mindless repetition every single time. When you pause a conversation to question your own language use, or you correct yourself in real time, you're actively processing grammar in a way that rote memorization simply cannot match. Okay, moving right along to part 4, types of corrective feedback. So how exactly should a teacher react to these mistakes? Well, according to research by Eva Karcheva, corrective feedback isn't just about bluntly saying, hey, you're wrong. It's actually a highly calculated science. This table neatly organizes feedback into two main categories. First, we have reformulations, which provide the input directly to the student. Second, we have prompts, which push the student to recognize their own errors. So, for instance, if a student awkwardly says, I have many book, a teacher might use a reformulation technique called a recast. They'd naturally reply, oh, you have many books? Which implicitly corrects the error without stopping the flow. Alternatively, they might use a metalinguistic prompt, asking something like, how do we form plurals in English? This forces the student to retrieve the rule themselves. Comparing these two main categories, we see a really distinct difference in strategy. You have the teacher doing all the heavy lifting in a recast versus empowering the student to self-correct through a prompt. And research indicates that prompts, because they push learners to actually modify their own output, generate much deeper cognitive processing.
That makes the correct form stick way better long term.
Finally, let's look at part 5, future trends in tech. Today, all these theories are the absolute backbone of task-based language teaching in modern classrooms. But what's truly fascinating is how they dictate how we acquire language through interactions with AI chatbots. We've evolved so much, right? From early programs like Eliza to interacting with modern AI like Siri and Amazon Echo. Studies actually show that when non-native speakers interact with these voice assistants, they're essentially engaging in that negotiation of meaning we talked about. The AI provides comprehensible input, and when a breakdown occurs, it implicitly offers corrective feedback.
So, I'm going to leave you with this pretty provocative thought to ponder. If artificial intelligence can be programmed to perfectly calculate our ideal +1 input level, and it never gets tired of negotiating meaning, and it can execute the exact optimal type of corrective feedback every single time without ever getting frustrated, well, will we eventually acquire languages better from machines than from actual human native speakers? The future of language acquisition might literally be sitting right inside your smart speaker. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.